Hi, this is ProACT Sam. Welcome to this live webinar. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you can get some value out of today's live webinar. What we do is we take questions each week from our clients through our website at proactpartnership.com, Living and Working Abroad page at Facebook and on YouTube, and pass those answers back to our clients through these live webinars to help people try to deal with issues that we have for living and working abroad. That's people that want to relocate to live, to retire, just to work, or to run their business cross-border and protect assets down the generation. So that's what we're doing. So thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy what we've got here. Today's acronym for our topic is BERT. So who is BERT? In the week that Vera Lynn died, the forces sweetheart from the Second World War, BERT was quite a good name there, so that's probably where I've come up with it. The first part of the topic today, the B is for Brexit. Many people think it's like yesterday's news, and maybe it is. So we said last time that we're waiting for an end of June deadline for whether there was going to be an extension or not. Some of this noise was coming from the EU, and what the UK government have clearly confirmed since our webinar last week is that the extension will not be applied for as required by the EU. So the EU was saying by the 30th of June, the UK have got to apply for an extension if they wanted an extension to the transition period beyond the 31st of December. The UK have said absolutely no. Again, we will not extend beyond the 31st of December. We do not want to apply for an extension. What we want to do is make an agreement on a trade deal before the end of December 2020. Now, it's all about a trade deal and how the UK and the EU continue to work going forward, and Corona complicates that for everybody. But the movement of people across border is already set in stone with the transition period. This negotiation during the transition year is all about trade deals and movement of goods and jobs and services after the end of the year. So that gives some uncertainty for businesses, but it also allows us to understand exactly what the rules are now and know that we can make plans to go ahead. So after this announcement, the EU's response has been very clear that they've just said that, okay, if that's the case, then they're not going to bother with any more substantial negotiations till September. They're going to focus on Corona and push back to September any substantial new negotiations on the Brexit EU trade agreement. Now, this brings us back to classic EU agreement. We saw with the last two times that right at the last minute, in the last month, the last weeks, the last days, the EU will suddenly come up with an agreement that they agree and accept and can go ahead with, that will be ratified. And just everybody's trying to make the best of it. So Brexit will happen on the 31st of December, so business needs to be ready for that. Travellers need to be ready for that. Overseas property owners need to be ready for that. The nature of that deal, we don't know yet, but there are existing precedents. The UK and the EU are aligned until the end of December, so they're already trading together, so they can agree in principle a set of agreements that they can use as a temporary basis while they formalise and negotiate a longer term deal and treatment. So how that will play out depends upon the politics, depends upon how the world going, how Corona evolves, how the UK-US election evolves, how China comes back into the fold or out of the fold, depending on how you look at it. So there's lots to go on, but that's nothing to do with what you can plan to do for your family and your business now, because the UK will leave the EU at the 31st of December. It's already left on the 31st of January. It's in the transition period. That business trading arrangement won't continue beyond that time. I've been told I've got to wave at everybody that comes on on the show. So that's the B, okay? And the second part of today's talk, the E and the R are together. It's expat residency. So Bert goes for Brexit and expat residency, and the two of them are tied. The two of them are tied. People's right to live and work in the EU, whether UK expat and looking at the EU or EU expat looking at the UK, it's already written down and it's in law. So those transition agreements have been made and have been set, and they're already in place. There's a settlement scheme in the UK, and there's a permanent residence basis in the EU, where any EU citizen, including UK citizens, that are living and working in that country before Brexit can live and remain in that country for the rest of their lives. So that applies to any EU citizen in the UK now, if they apply for settled status. It applies to any UK expat living and working in the EU if they apply for permanent residency basis. Now, that's not the same as citizenship, but it's a right to live and work abroad for the rest of their lives with their family, if that's what they want. And those exist. The bonus, even though the UK has left the EU, is that transition can still be made, but you have to have your initial residency submitted before the end of December 2020. So if you're relocating to Portugal, Spain, Cyprus, Greece, Denmark, Sweden, you have to be a resident in that country legally before the end of December this year, with a job or with an income, whatever the local residency requirements are, with accommodation and banking and jobs and business, for you to then carry on and have that life living and working abroad. So that's available to everybody now, but only to the end of December. Now, will it stop? Will the world come to an end then? No, it won't. A UK expat can still live and work in the EU after the end of Brexit, but it's more like the rest of the world. So if a UK expat wants to go and work in, for example, the Middle East, or Bahrain, Dubai, UAE, they're very happy. There's a lot of expats in those countries, but you have to have a business or an employment, a job, before you go there. And when you come to retire, you have to leave. You can't have residency unless you're working expat in those countries generally. So there are different rules for different countries around the world. So it would still be the case with EU countries, and it's slightly different. Cyprus rules are different to Ireland's rules are different to Portugal's rules or Spain. But essentially, whatever those rules are, they're slightly different. But a UK expat could still relocate to those other countries, but they'll have a different and higher level of proof in terms of starting a business, investing in property, having employment, and then once they get a working visa for those countries, they may well need to renew that every 2 years, every 4 years, every 5 years. And the only way to get out of that cycle of living and working abroad on a visa and have some permanent security, so you don't have to leave, like you have to leave the UAE when you retire or lose your job. The only way to get that residency certainty in your new home abroad would be to apply for citizenship. Now, during the Brexit period, Germany have changed their approach and allowed dual citizenship applications for people with British and German ties, which is something that's not commonly available if you're Austrian or German. In Cyprus, you can apply for citizenship after 7 years. In France or Ireland, after 5 years you can start making those applications. So it's slightly different for each country, but that is the world that is outside the EU. Within the EU, there's a lower level because you've got that innate right to live and work abroad. You still have to have income to support yourself, maybe healthcare and accommodation. But once you're living and working in the EU, you've got the right to remain there and to have that settled status permanently after 5 years in that country. You can, an EU expat, a UK expat in the EU can still start that 5-year period before the 31st of December 2020. So UK expats have still got freedom of movement until the end of this year, and then the right to remain for the rest of their life with their family living and working abroad. Now, if you're a business, that might mean that you want to relocate an employee, or you might want to set up a branch overseas, or a holding company that is within the EU rather than a holding company from the UK. So, for example, EasyJet have set up an Austrian business as a subsidiary that would operate as an independent business in the EU and give them access to the EU for their business. So there's lots of different options. At ProACT, we specialise in guiding service contractors, self-employed working people and businesses on how to organise their business across border and down generations to protect assets, make wills and operate from different jurisdictions. So contact us about your expat and residency. And then the final part for today's talk, we wanted to look the T in BERT stands for travel. So when we talk about expats, we're talking about people that have relocated. Once somebody's relocated and they've got citizenship after 10 years living in another country, they're not really an expat. They've relocated and they've become a citizen, and that they have the equivalent citizen rights in that new country. An expat is somebody that is actually living or working in that foreign country and moving between the two places maybe, and needs to be able to travel. But some people from Britain or the EU want to invest in holiday homes or investment property so that they can travel to Spain or Portugal or Cyprus for their holiday homes. And travel is a factor for them. And of course we've got Corona, which has created a bit of a crisis for anybody who wanted to go cross-border and enjoy their property in another location, and obviously devastates potential property letting and rental businesses in the short term. We can't predict how things will progress in terms of travel arrangements, but we can look at what the rules are today and what the rules are likely to be for the next month or two. So don't forget, generally the governments are being cautious and they're acting on a 3-week cycle because it takes a week to pass the disease on and a week for symptoms to show up and a week for you to know whether those symptoms are bad or not. So many people have got Corona and no symptoms and it's just gone away, but because the governments haven't tested everybody, they don't know that absolutely. So there's a lot of monitoring of all the bugs that are flying around, and a lot of caution as we all adopt to the new ways of working. Well, in Cyprus, everyone's back at work, they're back shopping, they're back eating out, and it's actually quite simple. It's the same, but it's different. Yes, you have to keep apart. Yes, you have to wash your hands. Yes, you have to not touch public documents, public services. And yes, you have to clean them down as you go along. And no, you can't go out if you've got a sniffle or a cold or a cough. And those basic hygiene principles, everybody's learned those and been conditioned that within the lockdown. And so things can progress. And so it's just a matter of getting that timing right so there isn't another outbreak. Unfortunately, because they're measuring every single case, we're quite tied up and consumed by the ongoing every case is a headline, or should it be? In Cyprus, we have 17 deaths which related to corona. So, and in London at the beginning of June, the number of expected deaths was below the norm that was expected. So there's less people dying in London in June than they would normally expect. So, corona is not decimating the London population at the moment. It's actually quite a healthy place to live, and that's the outcome of the lockdown. And I don't know whether I can say this macabre fact, but of course it's also the fact that those that would have died this year may have died a bit sooner, and that's a sad thing to happen. But unfortunately, we saw that corona did take out people that were vulnerable, and were maybe in the last year or two of their life anyway. So that's what we're watching out for. So what is the current travel arrangements? So the UK have introduced this bizarre 14-day quarantine if you go into the UK. Bizarre because it's a sound step, but it appears to be at the wrong time. Because people are coming from countries which have got a better COVID record at the moment into a country which has got more COVID. But once those people are in country, they're not being tested when they arrive, only being asked if they've got the symptoms, and then they're not being monitored. So they've been allowed to go pretty freely around. That, yes, stay in your place, stay in your lockdown, but is that practical to holidays? Is it practical to business? No, it's not. So it's effectively closed off the UK for business for expats. So if somebody wants to go on a holiday for 2 weeks abroad to Spain, they're currently left with the potential of coming back to the UK and having 2 weeks of lockdown before they can go back to work and what have you. Now, we can work around it, but is that the best way? It's one way of doing it. The second way that's happening in more other places in Europe, so if you're travelling to Europe, if you're allowed to travel to Europe from the UK or within Europe, so Cyprus opened their airports from the 9th of June, stage by stage, until the middle of July when the airports will be fully open. And certain countries you're allowed to travel to, and that number will be extended on depending upon the COVID corona record of those countries. So what we're seeing at the moment is that if you want to fly into Cyprus, you have to have a COVID test within 3 days of making the trip. So 3 days before, you have to go along, have a COVID test to test negative, obviously, to be able to travel into Cyprus, so that they know that the people are coming in have had a recent test and they're corona-free. So if the social distancing on the airline is enforced and it's clean and it's hygienically effective and nobody on that plane has got corona, then you can let those people in knowing that they haven't got corona, and therefore you don't have to lock them down. So that's the EU approach, and the approach if you're coming to live in coming to Cyprus. So UK expats can come to Cyprus now without any lockdown, as long as they've had that COVID test 3 days within 72 hours of making the trip out. The problem is when the UK to the return. So we're waiting for the UK to see if they'll revise that 14-day lockdown period, or maybe adopt a testing strategy, because obviously if you test everybody that's coming in and they haven't got corona, then they don't need to lock down. But it's two ways to tackle the same problem, and the UK is out of sync with Europe at the moment, so we just need to see and adapt as we go along. Businesses, meanwhile, have got to get through the summer, and how are you going to carry on working with these different speeds of relaxation of travel if you want to get people visiting your branches overseas, or you've got business deals to do abroad, how are you going to be able to do that effectively? Well, we've got to continue to invest in online business, got to continue to do online meetings and online work. So that's where businesses need to go. I know that with our business, ProACT, we divided it up quite a lot. It turns out we were already pretty online, and most of our clients are a bit bemused, but they shouldn't be, because our reception centre, our call centre reception is in the UK. So people from the UK office answer the phone and take a message. It doesn't mean that the consultant that you need to speak to is immediately available, but that person might have been busy. Even if you've been able to phone an office straight away, that person could be in a meeting or presenting a live webinar or doing an important piece of work for another client. So they're not necessarily going to be available anyway. So generally, we have people that take messages so we can get back to them. And that slows down the process of doing the work, but it can make it more precise as well. So, and that's something that's not completely different, but it's adoption of a different mentality within the business to move forward. So we know now that all our clients have their phone answered for 10 hours a day during business hours, and that message, people are going to get a call back within 1 day. So businesses have to adapt for that. So any guidance and help you want with that cross-border travel, or reorganising the business, or reorganising your tax bases, consider that and contact us at ProACTPartnership.com. You've got our info at ProACT Partnership as the email, or you can go to our contact us page and have your question. We'll feature your questions generally in our webinars, or get back to you directly with one of our client service team that will call you with an online meeting. We prefer to use FaceTime, WhatsApp or Google Meetings, but we can just use an old-fashioned telephone call. So contact us and we'll be here to help. There's quite a lot changing, but for Bert, it's an interesting month. And we know now that Brexit is going to happen at the end of 2020. So if you've got ambitions to be an expat and resident in the EU, you need to make your move before the end of the year so that we can use the lower level of EU citizen rights for a UK expat to relocate within the EU for living and working, setting up a business. We're available to do that. Contact us at ProACTPartnership.com, and it will keep you updated on things like as the travel unwinds and what you need to look out for there to support your overseas property, your overseas business, or your overseas lifestyle. Thanks for listening, and leave your messages and your comments, and we'll speak to you again next time. Thank you.